Hi, folks. This is ICUJP for Friday morning, March 13th. It is Friday the 13th. Whether you put any weight on that I think it's important to remember with stuff like that or with astrology, the positioning of the planets will not affect you in any way unless they start smacking each other. In the chat, you'll see the ICUJP link tree, which has a lot of information not only on the group and our website, information on authors and producers and directors that have presented to us. So we have information on also on ways that you can donate to ICUJP, which is very helpful for us as we go out and recover from COVID and go out into the world and put on forums, go to events, put on events. Um, all the things that the costs that involved in that, like printing flyers, renting space, all of that is something that we unfortunately have to contribute to predatory capitalism when we do that. But it is a necessary evil. So if you can help us out, either on a one-time donation or monthly, you can do that. And that's all information on that link tree. So one of the reasons that we want to invite him is a couple reasons. We want to promote the work of professors and writers in Southern California. And he is a professor of Middle East history at California State University, Los Angeles. Professor Afshin Matin-Asgari was born in Iran, studied in the United States, and he's been doing a lot of publishing. In the invite that got you here today, there are two links that you can go to in that colored box right there. The first one is a link to the book Axis of Empire, A History of Iran-U.S. Relations, and that's out on Verso Books. And the other one is a New York Times opinion piece that he and a few other authors were involved in, called "What Will Iran's Future Hold?" Uh, Professor Matin-Asgari, the floor is yours. If everybody else can stay on mute, that would be great.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm really grateful to be here. I recently have been to on many shows, interviews. Uh, when my book came out, this book came out about a month and a half ago, and it wasn't my planning, but all of a sudden it coincided with uh, first with the protests in Iran that were brutally put down, and then with this war. So the book got a lot of attention. Um, and I have been speaking not about just the book, but about the war. Last week, I was on a uh, panel featuring the book, but also myself and other speakers, and there were 700 people there. Verso, the publisher, had organized it. But the reason I mention that is uh, this meeting today with I can see that there's like 21 of us here. The way you all introduce yourselves makes me really appreciate that this group here is the kind of people I belong to when I came to the US in the 1970s, activist, anti-war, anti-imperialist, um, people of different religious backgrounds, people whose religious affiliation is progressive. And so I feel at home. Some of you are here in Southern California. Rick, I think we may even have met in some event. I mean, but if we haven't, I'm sure I'll see you and others here in rallies. I work to any quote pink rally I could possibly attend. with my daughter, with my wife. Uh, Last week I was in a rally called by Code Pink here in the city of Santa Ana, um, and we were attacked by a group of monarchists. Luckily, there was no violence. Well, there was a little bit. They hit a Palestinian man on the face and drew blood, but because they were Iranians, I could speak Persian with them, and I was telling them, "Well, why are you doing this? We are just calling for peace and stop the war." And of course, they were MAGA Iranians. They love Donald Trump, and they're like bomb, bomb, bomb Iran, and just telling them no good is going to come out of that. And they were getting violent. So close to code pink, close to, and I'm really appreciating those of you who are all over the world, from Spain to I forgot what other countries. So to make my presentation not too long, um, uh, uh, I would focus on like a brief, very, very brief outline of what this book, Axis of Empire, is about, focusing on more recent history and focusing on what led to this war. And war, I realize, and I think you agree with me, is a bit uh, not accurate because it's a brazen invasion of Iran by, the world's greatest imperialist superpower, and its sidekick that is not really a sidekick. The sidekick sets the agenda, Israel. Um, and so we get to that. But in the book's introduction, I try to say where I'm coming from. And there have been several books on U.S.-Iran relations recently, and they're quite good studies. Mine was different in the sense that I'm a historian, so I go back to the long-term history. I cover 200 years. I go back to early 19th century. There's something there that I think is of interest to you, so I'm going to mention it briefly. Um, but also, mine is different in the sense that from the get-go, I say that I'll take an anti-imperialist position. And I relate that to my personal background. As Rick mentioned, I was born and grew up in Iran, finished high school, came here to the US, landed in Southern California. I had family members who were here ahead of me, and so I followed them. But I was part of a massive uh, it wasn't a migration, but there were like 50,000 Iranian students in the 70s, at their maximum number, late 1970s, in the US, and I was one of them. Iran had the largest number of foreign students in the US at that time. 50,000 is a lot. Um, that number was matched by about 50,000 Americans who were in Iran in the 1970s. Um, and those of us who were in the US, I arrived in 1974, summer of 1974. And all of you, I'm sure you're activists, you remember that was Nixon was crying on television. He was kind of resigning in shame, and the U.S. had just was defeated, had pulled out of Vietnam, and it was a very different country. It was a very different moment in time. Um, and so my you want to call it acculturation, was into that milieu, into that environment of activism and setbacks for the American empire, a moment of a little bit of a reflection. Why are we doing this? Why are we intervening in other countries? Why do we have a corrupt president? Um and so that was. Oh, someone was calling me from Iran. So that was I don't know if I should have taken that or not, but It's a good sign. It means that they can be reached. But I won't take it. Sorry. I was just having my phone on because that kind of thing would happen. The relatives, friends in Iran with whom I have lost contact, but I was hoping somebody might call, but I'll call them back. Um, so yeah, that's when I arrived, and the Iranian students had a large political movement, student movement, which was amazingly a large percentage of this 50,000 students were politically active. By the accounts of Iranian government, about 10% of them, and 10% is huge. And this movement, I was not, like a street activist. I was a little bit more bookish. I was a history major already. I mean, I would go to demonstrations and protests. I was active in the movement, but more, let's say, on the intellectual side. Um, and but the movement was very influential. This was the second half of the 1970s when there was grumblings of kind of criticism of the Shah's regime. At that time, remember, Iran had a monarchy. The Shah of Iran put on his throne in 1953 by a CIA MI6 engineered coup d'etat that overthrew the popular nationalist government of Mohammad Mossadegh. Iran's oil was nationalized. It was controlled by the British. And so Mossadegh was a defiant nationalist. It led finally to his overthrow. Um, all of these are part of the stories that I cover in the book. Um, but by the late 1970s, there was some kind of partly, this was after Nixon, after Watergate, after Vietnam. For the first time in US media and even in Congress, there were voices raised that why are we supporting so unconditionally a regime that depends on the decisions of one man, and the amount of arms he was purchasing from the US was staggering, basically anything he wanted to short of nuclear weapons. And by the way, Nixon and Kissinger had started to help the Shah build a nuclear program. Iran's famous or infamous nuclear program goes back to that time. At that time, they thought it was a good thing. It was part of the stuff they were selling the Shah for billions of dollars. Um, so the student movement played a major role in amplifying the voices of dissent in Iran. I may get back to it as I fast forward, but let me just go to the beginning of very quickly because the chapter one of the book covers 100 years from the 1830s almost to the Second World War, and what might be of interest to you is that the first kind of major encounter between Iranians and Americans. I distinguish in the book between when we say Iran and US, uh, I I wanted to focus on non-state interactions. Iranians and Americans of all walks of life. There's been a lot of interaction. Unfortunately, the states take over. But in the earlier days, there was no diplomatic relations in early to mid to late 19th century. There was no diplomatic relation between the two countries. Uh, the Americans who came to Iran, guess who they were? They were Presbyterian missionaries. There wasn't like, hundreds of and thousands of them, but there was a good, few dozens, and then the numbers increased, and they came to convert. But the Iranian government, which was Muslim, would not allow the conversion of Muslims, but they were allowed to convert. Iran had a very tiny population of Christians of various Eastern church denominations, small Jewish population. So presumably the Presbyterians could try to convert them. They were not successful in that either. But what they brought which the Iranians liked of all religions and backgrounds, was they would open health clinics, they would open schools, and local people liked that. And so there were like two or three or even four generations of Presbyterians. They were the Americans who overall made a good impression. They had an agenda. The agenda was, religious evangelism, but that agenda was not really getting any traction, and they themselves soon realized this. And so their mission turned into, okay, well, we're going to preach on the side, but let's give the Iranians what they like. And so they stayed. And that was, if there was an auspicious or good beginning of Iran-US relations, partly it goes back to these missionaries. I have argued in the book that there is a myth of auspicious beginning, that everything between Iran and the US was great, and then came the 1950 coup overthrow of Mossadegh, and everything went south and went back. And I would say, no, it's not exactly like that. Um, Even when things were not really state to state, we have to remember that the missionaries were acting on their own, on behalf of the Board of Missionaries stationed in the U.S. But the American government was not involved. Things, as soon as relations, the government stepped in, there was no auspicious beginnings. So to fast forward and not take too long, um, uh, really the major, and here's where the governments enter the picture. Interaction between Iran and the US goes back to the Second World War. Iran was under occupation by British and Soviet forces. Um, the, the British and the Soviets were in a strange alliance against Nazi Germany. Iran was the country, the father of the Shah, was pro-German, and Iran was very vital as a linkage, as a transition point from the Persian Gulf to the Soviet Union, where holding it not only was important because of its oil, which the British controlled, it was enormously important to the war effort, but once they occupied Iran and removed the Shah's father and put on the throne Muhammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah, who was overthrown in 1979. He was a young man of no consequence. He was just like someone decorative on his throne. Gradually, he became more powerful. But at first, he was just a candidate that occupying forces put on a throne, a compromised figure, and then the U.S. joined the war, and the U.S. was sending lend-lease massive amounts of armaments using the Iranian railroad from the Persian Gulf to the Caspian to send vital shipments of arms to the Soviet Union. There was that strange kind of coalition of the U.S., the Soviets, and the British. And Iran was a vital place in that war effort. Um, when the war ended, the Allies were successful. Um, the U.S. had 30,000 soldiers and military-related personnel in Iran, and that was the beginning of the U.S. entanglement with Iran. And this is important because the military connection, the U.S. government's connection to the Iranian armed forces, I would argue, and it's not just I I worked 10 years on this book, and all the serious sources I have studied noticed this, that the US government, as soon as it entered the picture in Iran in a serious way, zeroed in on building ties to the armed forces, to the army, to the police, to the gendarmerie, that was rural police. And that was the foundation of US-Iran relations. At the US, I know that many of you are aware of this globally. That's been the foundation of US imperialist ties to any kind of dependent regime. The army is vital in that. And the Shah, who was a young man, gradually kind of gravitated towards the US. He used to rely on the British, But then it was clear that after the Second World War, it was clear that the U.S. is the world's hegemon. And so the U.S. focused on grooming the Shah and the links to the armed forces served U.S. interests well because in 1953 there was a showdown between the Shah and Prime Minister Mossadegh over oil nationalization. The British had a plan for his overthrow. It couldn't work because he threw the British out of Iran, but they had a MI6, British intelligence network set in place in Tehran. The American CIA joined it. The overthrow of Mossadegh was the CIA's first major coup. It was an actual coup and it was a political coup. And then the game plan was repeated, not exactly, but closely, 1954 in Guatemala, that followed the Iran plan. And the Shah was brought back and in a very kind of a tight relationship with the US. Um, the story of the Shah's relationship with the US is complicated. In the old student days, in our protest demonstrations, the one slogan was the Shah is a US puppet. Well, he wasn't exactly a puppet in the sense that he would, pick up the phone every morning and ask whoever was the U.S. president, "What should I do, my master?" At first, he was a rather weak figure. Gradually, his base in Iran grew mostly by the late 1960s, early 1970s, as Iran's oil income became a bonanza, and so the Shah, as the country's absolute dictator, theoretically, on paper, Iran was a constitutional monarchy, a parliamentary democracy it was supposed to be, or something close to it. So the potential was there. But the way things worked with full US backing, um, this was all on paper, still a constitutional monarchy. In practice, everybody knew that the Shah was calling all the shots. Of course, no one can run a country alone. He had aides and he had people who in various ways supported the regime. They benefited from being yes man to the monarch. And so he gradually became enormously powerful. And I would say by the time of the Nixon-Kissinger administration, the Shah began to have delusions of grandeur, to think that he really is a powerful figure on the world stage. Nixon, Kissinger, they really kind of pushed this kind of idea on the Shah. And the one infamous uh, showcase of this was the great 1971 celebration of 2500 years of monarchy in Iran. There's a very interesting BBC documentary on that. It's called something like The Shah's Greatest Party. Entertaining and actually well documented. You can check that out. Um, but at the same time, as the delusion of power was growing, so were the problems, the cracks in the system that were appearing. Now I'm moving towards the story of the Iranian Revolution, which I have to do very quickly because I want to focus on the past century or so of the Islamic Republic. So we can go back and in our discussion if you want to talk about the revolution. There's misconceptions that the Carter administration brought the Shah down, which doesn't make any sense. The Iranian monarchist, the Shah himself, put that narrative out there. But looking at it closely, I can tell you, and these are the arguments I make in the book, that the Carter administration was sort of out of it as it when it came to Iran. As we moved closer to the end of the 1970s, it was clear that the Shah has increasing problems. And but the U.S. Carter at that time was preoccupied with Camp David, with SALT II negotiations with the Soviet Union, and all of a sudden in fall 1978, like 3 or 4 months before the Shah fell, people in Washington realized that he's in trouble, and then they didn't know what to do. There are two ways of thinking. National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski wanted an iron hand. He wanted the Shah to crush the protest. Mostly the State Department and people who knew a little better, and the ambassador, U.S. ambassador in Iran, William Sullivan, who was on the ground, they realized that it can work. Even if you go out there and kill thousands of people, this regime is crumbling. So their advice finally prevailed, and at some point in January 1979, the U.S. ambassador went to the Shah and said, "Your Majesty, it's now time to leave." Um, so the Shah left, his regime crumbled, as was obviously would do. Ayatollah Khomeini, who was this figure of opposition, not necessarily the undisputed leader he became at a point. He was one figure in the opposition only in the last year of the Shah's rule, and really only in the last 6 months, he emerged as the leader of the opposition. So this idea that the Iranian Revolution was about Islam and people went back and they wanted to go back to the ways of 400 years. No, there wasn't anything like that. Now, to make this personal, and I don't want to make my talk too long, um, I was already here since 1974. In the fall of 1978, I was a history major at California State University, Los Angeles, where I'm teaching now. And I was a history undergrad, but I could see the revolution is brewing, something we've been waiting for years. And so I dropped my courses and went back to Iran to be in the street protest. I was running around like a lot of people, young people, old people, all kinds. Um, One important thing is, and people forget this, the Shah's regime did not fall because of just street protests. This idea that is very current now that people should come out and get killed in protest, and then the regime falls. It wasn't like that. The whole country was in a general strike, and there was a massive quick but massive buildup to the economy was paralyzed. The oil workers were on strike. Everything, government employees were on strike. Factories were taken over by workers, and street rallies and protests were part of a larger mass mobilization. That is why the regime crumbled. And this idea that is going around in especially in Iranian diaspora exile circles that people would just go out there and say death to the Islamic Republic and the regime kills you and then the regime falls is false. Nothing like that happened even back in the revolution. Then just to fast forward 1979, after the Shah left, the monarchy fell. Um, in that first year, the idea of an Islamic Republic was proposed by Ayatollah Khomeini. Nobody knew what it meant. Even Khomeini did not know what an Islamic Republic he was proposing might be like. At first, he had the idea that, okay, well, I was a religious or am a religious leader that people charismatic. People have followed me. We brought down the regime. And then I go to the seminary in Qom and kind of act as a elderly statesman advisor to whatever form of government emerges. But quickly it became obvious that, as happens in post-revolutionary regime, the revolutionary coalition that included leftists, nationalists, religious leftists, it was a very massive and complicated array of forces. It fell apart. And because the state had crumbled, and because real power was in the hands of ordinary people, and also because the barracks and military posts, police stations had fallen, and the people were armed. the last figures I saw was 300,000 small arms. So small arms means also machine guns. Were in the hands of ordinary people, and some of them knew how to use them. So you have an armed populace that is effectively in control, and there's no state. But parts of the country, like Kurdistan, they were virtually autonomous, and they were holding on to their autonomy. So a mini civil war began. Uh, Gradually, a kind of a movement began to coalesce around Khomeini that this is not going to work. We have to have some kind of a control built around this idea of the supreme jurist. The supreme, jurist means someone like Khomeini, an expert in Islamic law, Sharia, a high-ranking, respected religious figure, and his charisma, his following was immense. I was not a Khomeini supporter ever, but I could see that this man has, the following of millions of people. To me, this was something like a fascist movement. I had studied fascism, so I could see it recognize it when I could see it. Um, there was an intense power struggle over a new constitution that was, by definition, a dictatorship because it invested unchecked and almost absolute power in the hands of a clerical establishment headed by the supreme religious leader, Khomeini himself. It wasn't going down well. I was in the country until the end of summer of 1979, and I was in now protests and rallies and demonstrations against this new drift or direction that the country was taking. Everything changed, and now I'm getting to the more focused part of my presentation. Everything changed with a major event, and that was hostage taking at the U.S. Embassy. The famous or infamous Iran hostage crisis. It lasted for 444 days. Um, Ostensibly, it was to bring the Shah back to Iran. The Shah was an exile. Kissinger clan and Rockefeller clan, they pushed the Carter administration to bring him to the U.S. for medical treatment, which was absolutely unnecessary. He was getting the same medical treatment in Mexico, but they forced Carter. He made a big mistake, and he later said it was a mistake. He brought the Shah to the U.S., and then that became the reason for attacks on anti-Americanism, anti-imperialism. They're not the same thing, we all know, but the Iranian Revolution has a very powerful anti-imperialist momentum. And when a group of students linked to the government took the U.S. Embassy and its personnel hostage, Khomeini decided to throw his support behind them. And this turned into a standoff between Iran and the US. The sanctions that for 46 years, actually 47 years, have been imposed on Iran, economic sanctions, that's a declaration of war. But so was the taking of the embassy. You take a government, foreign government's embassy and its personnel hostage. In a way, it was the Islamic Republic that had first picked on the U.S. because the relations at that time were not that bad. They're cool, but they're okay. It was legit. The embassy was functioning in Tehran. Khomeini, for his own reasons of regime consolidation, once he took the U.S. embassy hostage in that year, went over a little over a year, he managed to consolidate this new constitution. He managed to get rid of all opposition. Nobody could oppose a government that is in a face-off with the U.S. And in that year also, Iraq, Saddam Hussein invaded Iran. So now the revolution is in a standoff with the US and is at war with Saddam Hussein. So the Islamic Republic consolidated in the middle of war and some kind of an anti-imperialist face-off. And this became foundational to the character of the Islamic Republic, this idea of defiance, this idea of standing up to the American empire at no matter what cost. The cost was enormous. if you add the cost of the war to this, and all the people who died, both on the Iranian and Iraqi side, the war lasted for 8 years. The U.S. was involved in it in a way, I go into the details of this in the book, in a way that would be familiar to you. The way the US and Israel were involved in the Iran-Iraq war was they would help and support whichever side that seemed to gain the upper hand. When Iraq had the upper hand, they would try to help Iran. When the Iranians had the upper hand, which happened as the war dragged on, then they focused on supporting Saddam Hussein and Iraq. And by the end of the war, the U.S. was getting directly involved in the war, was attacking and destroying Iranian presence in the Persian Gulf. Iran gave up, and the war ended. Khomeini died a year after that. The Islamic Republic. Now I'm going to do a little bit of a fast forward. Um, uh, in the 1990s, it was the post-war reconstruction, slowing down of the revolutionary momentum, and there were attempts at reaching out to the U.S., especially during the Clinton administration, that maybe some kind of a détente or mending of the worst kind of conflicts might be possible. Um, and Clinton began to relent to some extent, but the sanctions were never removed. And we have to remember that these economic sanctions were not something that even some US corporations liked. They wanted to do business with Iran, but the sanctions prevented that. The strongest lobby in the US that pushed for continuing the sanctions and increasing them was the Israel lobby. Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel was also in office in the 1990s, and he had an agenda uh, which he was able to push to the foreground of US politics. And that was Iran is building a nuclear bomb. Iran has military presence and proxies in outside of its borders. Iran is supporting Lebanon's Hezbollah. Iran is having some kind of a presence in Syria, which was true. The Iranians were out of revolutionary internationalism, anti-imperialism in their mind, out of partly opportunism, but partly out of these movements were not Iranian proxies. Hezbollah was an indigenous movement of resistance to Israeli aggression and occupation. But the Islamic Republic did develop ties with them. But at the same time, they were kind of quietly, if we move again faster forward to post 9/11, when the US was going to invade Afghanistan, the government of Iran coordinated with them and actually cooperated in the US invasion and occupation of Afghanistan. And when next was Iraq, the Iranian government was very happy that the US would go in there and overthrow Saddam Hussein because that would increase Iran's leverage. Saddam Hussein was their enemy. So, ironically, there was a moment where there seemed to be a convergence of goals between US and Islamic Republic, but that was the moment in the early 21st century that the Israel lobby in the US and the Israeli government went on a massive push of putting Iran on the agenda of the world's greatest sponsor of terrorism because of its support for movements like Hezbollah. And Iran is building a nuclear bomb. Its nuclear program is not peaceful. Um, and uh, so the issue of Iran's nuclear program became paramount. The sanctions increased, and the sanctions were always admittedly to hurt the people of Iran. The government was really not hurt by the sanctions. In a strange sense, it even helped them kind of to reconfigure the political economy of the country, circumventing sanctions and making money through them became a part of the powerful revolutionary guards and the real power holders in Iran, some kind of an oligarchy that operated outside the parameters of formal government, the the shadow government of or the regime, the hardcore of the regime, benefited directly by these sanctions, and also being uh, under this kind of pressure, helped the regime to become more militarized, to become more aggressive, telling any kind of dissent. We have to remember that Iran had wave after wave of popular protests asking for peaceful change, opening up of the system, and the hardcore of the regime always resisted and responded with force and violence. Um, so these cycles of protests have continued all the way to the present. The last one was the one in early January 2026 uh, by this time, most of the protesters had given up on peaceful change because they have tried and tried and failed. But it's important to notice that the forces on the ground have not gone away. Labor unions, students, women's organizations, pensioners. So they're there and they're pushing. And it does matter. The women's movement, for example, scored a great victory. They effectively turned back the onerous kind of mandatory dress codes. Um, so that's in the books. That's the law of the country, but the government can't enforce it. So they just look the other way. So I want to say that these movements from Iranian civil society have been successful and they've been there. It's not that they're all defeated. Um, so to bring my talk to a conclusion and then maybe continue in conversation with you, uh, the immediate background to this war, to the crisis we're facing, is strangely an accommodation between the Islamic Republic and the US government under Obama's second term. Um, a deal uh, that came to be called the Obama deal was reached between the US government and the Iranian government, whereby Iran's nuclear energy program was put under very strict international monitoring. So it would not advance beyond a certain minimum where you can uh, build nuclear energy, but you can't enrich uranium for bomb building. And the Iranian side agreed to this and they stayed within the agreement. And in return, Obama began to lift some of the sanctions. So a breakthrough was made despite enormous opposition by the Israeli government and Israel lobby. Netanyahu himself came here, went to Congress, trashed Obama, but lo and behold, for the first time, the Israel lobby failed. They were pushed back and the agreement went through. Uh, Supporters of the Israel lobby and Republicans who were adamantly opposed to this, they all said, wait and see. We're going to turn this around. And they did turn it around. Uh, During Trump's first presidential term, he just said, no, this is not a good agreement. I'm going to throw it out and I'm going to force a better deal on Iran. Well, that better deal never came. The better deal is this war because in Tehran, the Islamic Republic resisted that. For some time, they stayed within the agreement. But then they just went ahead and said, like, what the heck? Okay, if the other side is not observing this, neither would we. And they tried to do something that I think was a mistake. They tried to raise their enrichment towards bomb building, to get closer to that. So Iran's policy was this kind of a strategic ambiguity. They always said officially, no, we don't want to build a bomb. It's forbidden by Islam. Yet at the same time, we're going to get ourselves close to the threshold of being able to build a bomb if we all of a sudden change our mind and wanted to build one. I don't think this was a wise policy, but that's what they did. Biden, between the two Trump administration, had a chance to maybe renew that agreement. But his attention was elsewhere. His attention was 100% support to Israel's genocide, against the Palestinians. And so an opportunity to somehow go back to some kind of agreement, reducing tensions with Iran, was lost uh, as Israel was doing its genocidal kind of ramping around. Is this the policy that Israel is pursuing all the way to this war? And I don't think this is even in, you go to mainstream media, they all see this. What Israel wants is to be able to fly anywhere in the Middle East, bomb anywhere it wants to, kill any leader it wants to, and basically turn the whole region in, so I call it Gazification. It wants to, as much as possible, to have command of the skies, which it has, and with 100% US support and with force and violence, impose its hegemony. Um, in that policy, it began to raise the level of its conflict with Tehran. It was already assassinating Iran's nuclear scientists. I'm sorry, not Obama. Obama did order the assassination of other people, but Trump um, got involved and ordered assassination of Iran's military personnel outside of Iran. And when the Israelis raised their campaign of targeted killing beyond a certain limit, then Iran retaliated and hit Israel with missiles. And then Israel retaliated by bombing Iran, and the two countries were at war. And that culminated in the war of last summer, June 2025. And Trump joined in massive bombardments of Iran's nuclear facilities. And Trump, as usual, said, "We're done. We've destroyed their nuclear infrastructure. Goodbye." Uh, but Trump is Trump's contradictory. The truth of nothing matters. Whatever he has said doesn't matter. And in the middle of negotiations with the Islamic Republic, um, all of a sudden you had the war coming, which shows that negotiations were really not serious. It seems that, and he said it, he said, Iran, why aren't they capitulating? So if your negotiations are you're asking the other side for total surrender, they don't accept, then what do you do? The next thing he did was this war, which obviously was in the planning for a long time. It wasn't just something you do a spur of the moment. And so that would bring us to this moment. Maybe this is a good place for me to pause and maybe continue in kind of conversation. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. This has been very informative, and it's good to get the that perspective, especially from someone who has, you know, been involved in all of those aspects of Iranian history from, from the Mossadegh overthrow to the present day. Steve, you had your hand up.
Well, I want to really thank you so much. I'm so glad this is recorded. It is such a clear and helpful history, bringing us right up to the day, to the present time. So, and I will give way to others as they raise their hand electronically and otherwise, and we'll enjoy your company as long as you can stay with us. What is your assessment? First of all, there are many countries that possess nuclear weapons around the world and that are developing nuclear weapons. If there is a threat to Iran from its neighbors and from the United States, doesn't Iran have a right to develop nuclear weapons? And to what extent has that program moved to a level that they are able to weaponize nuclear weapons? As best as you can put together the intelligence and putting aside US propaganda and Israeli propaganda, what is the state of that program?
Okay, so I try to give quick answers. These are all quite good but complex questions, so I'll try to give a quick answer. Um, But when we say Iran, first of all, oh, we have to think about the Islamic Republic and its policies, including the nuclear policy. They're not asking the people of Iran if you agree to this. We don't know if ordinary Iranians approve of these policies, and apparently most of them are not in favor of most of the government's decisions. So these are decisions that the regime is taking on its own without necessarily public approval. I can speak for myself as an observer, as an outsider. I always try to make my position clear and be aware of it. I'm Iranian American. I don't live in Iran. I get very kind of surprised that people who, especially in the diaspora, they know or they claim they know what Iranians want, but Iranians are not allowed to speak. So we have to be humble and realistic and admit that we don't know what most Iranians want. Probably they want different things. Until they're allowed to speak openly and freely, we don't know what they want. And I say this as a preface to our discussion. Sorry, I'm going a little off topic, but uh, what do Americans want? It's a very difficult question to generalize. Americans want different things. Some are fascists. They're MAGA. No matter what happens, they want Donald to do whatever the hell he wants to. So the nuclear program, I personally am against even nuclear energy. I think it's a dangerous thing that, I go back to the anti-nuke movement of the 1960s and 70s. Um, but even if you say, okay, well, for whatever reasons, the Islamic Republic had a nuclear energy program, the problem is it's enormously expensive. They've spent billions of dollars, and it hasn't produced results. Iran is facing shortage of electricity, and it has had a nuclear energy program, presumably providing energy, meaning electricity at least. But it's facing shortages of electricity, so the program has not even been successful in its peaceful sense. And I think they trap themselves in this narrative that Israel really has spawned, that they want to build a nuclear bomb. And if you have a nuclear program, and if you want to build a bomb, then go ahead and build it. This idea that no, 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 we're not going to build this. We just want to have the capability of building it. I don't think that's like a sane or kind of helpful strategy. I think they fell into the trap of assuming the posture of a potential uh, nuclear power without, and the Israelis and the US have said, we'll never let you build your bomb. And partly this war is in relation to that. The argument is, yeah, you're getting close, we're going to prevent you. And but this is not the end of the story, because we can get to this in further in the conversation, that if the Islamic Republic survives this war, which increasingly seems the more likelihood, then there are voices that say, okay, now this proves that you do need a nuclear bomb. Go ahead and build it. Because look at North Korea, look at countries that have nuclear bombs, they're safe. If you have nuclear bombs, the US would leave you alone. Again, I don't agree with that argument, but we can talk about it. They're close. They're close to, if uh, but then I say they're close, but it's clear that Israel and the US are not going to allow them to build this. Now their nuclear program has suffered huge setbacks, but they have about 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium. That's part of the story that they have hidden somewhere, and they're holding on to it. So the nuclear infrastructure is badly damaged, but they could go back and start rebuilding it and presumably try to build a bomb. So I leave you in that kind of there's an element of it that is we don't really know, and is hanging in the balance like everything else. Sorry, I to give it.
No, that's good. I mean, it's accurate, right? Some of the people on this call were a couple months ago at an event that we do every year, in protest of the fact that Guantanamo is still open, and holding political prisoners. We had that at the West Side, Federal Building on, was it Sunday or Saturday? I can't remember, but uh,
Sunday, January 11th.
that's right. Yes. And it happened to coincide with a huge Iranian protest that was put together, and I guess in support of the descendant of the Shah that they want to put in place. I had, is there a lot of, momentum for this person being brought back, or is this basically, are we getting a view of how powerful that movement is because of the population of, Iranian people, that demographic in Los Angeles?
Yes, this is an excellent question. Uh, on the monarchism, let's call it monarchism, this idea of return to the monarchy, that the monarchy under the Shah was a golden age. Yes, there were maybe problems, but it was a much better time when compared to the almost 50 years of the Islamic Republic. You have war, you have sanctions, you have massive repression. And it's true that as repressive as the Shah's regime was, the Islamic Republic has been much more repressive. They've killed much more people, they've thrown in prison more people. Just last January, they opened fire and mowed down protesters in the streets. So, this idea of a return to a golden age, which has been kind of pounded down into Iran by satellite television. Um, the most famous or infamous one is Iran International, and then there's another one that is officially sponsored by the U.S. government. And they have saturated airways, and people watch them. I have relatives in Iran who are addicted to these programs. So this movement that a return to monarchy as a lost golden age was somehow nebulously in the air without much traction. But in recent years, as all kind of possibilities of transition from inside the regime have been blocked, then monarchism have gained more traction. And we have to remember that this is a movement mostly based outside of Iran, in the diaspora, and heavily supported by the right wing in this country and Israel. Israel is the main base of monarchist support, and the Shah's son, the pretender to the crown, he says that I don't necessarily want to be a king. I want to be the leader of a transition to a free and democratic Iran. And then if people want a monarchy, okay, I'll oblige. I'll be the monarch. If they want something else, I agree. Um, uh, this movement has gained more traction because in the past few years there have been calls for support of the monarchy in Iranian protests. Now, that doesn't mean that, first of all, you have to remember that the protests are they're dangerous when people go out there in the streets and cry out down with the regime. Um, it's not that the whole country is out there. In in the greatest revolutions, also a tiny minority are actively out. So yes, they've been called for a return to monarchy in Iran in rallies and protests, but as far as we know, it has no institutional support. We do know that a lot of calls for change come from Iranian civil society organizations. Again, the kind that we mentioned, labor unions, student movements, women's organizations, pensioners, you name them. None of them has asked for a monarchy. So, as far as we have tangible, actual, institutionalized kind of opposition or dissent in Iran, monarchism doesn't seem to have a base. Yes, in street protests, when people yell, down with the Islamic Republic, some would say, long live the king, which is a very strange, the king is dead and we don't have a king. So it's like a strange echo of long live a golden age that doesn't exist anymore. So what do we want to do? So monarchism, I would say, is a powerful presence recently in the Iranian diaspora, and especially in the US. You have to remember that it's largely backed by the right wing in the US and by Israel. And the monarchists are pro-Israeli. The Shah's son, in his monarchist protests, you may have seen it in that protest, the Israeli flags. Uh, in the rally I mentioned that we were almost beat up, I was wearing a kafia. And one of these monarchists said, what is that piece of garbage you're wearing? I said, lady, I mean, they've killed 70,000 Palestinians. I'm wearing this in sympathy. And her answer was 70,000 is not enough. They should have killed all of them. So when the monarchists identify with that kind of narrative, I think they're also undermining themselves because now they're calling for the bombardment of the country. Maybe I had relatives in Iran. I talked to them. They said, to hell with it. Let Trump come and bomb the whole country and kill all these bastards. Kill me, but overthrow the regime. I don't care. That's just like emotionalism and irrational posture. But I think especially this war is going to turn that tide. When people see that the war is not a cakewalk, it can't overthrow the Islamic Republic. It just leads to ordinary Iranians, like those poor girls in the girls' school in Minab in southern Iran. People see that and they realize that we have to think differently. This idea of Trump, Donald Trump, thank you, bomb my country, is going to undermine the monarchist position. I think it already has.
You discussed the question of nuclear weapons. I would say that that is really a cover for regime change. And you mentioned that the Biden administration could have picked up where Obama left off and improved relations um, uh, with Iran. But I think you can correct me if I'm wrong that Biden, yes, he could have improved relations, but he was preoccupied with Ukraine, and that brings up the question of the connection between regime change in Iran, the BRICS association, Russia, and China. And I think part of the hostility towards Iran derives from a similar hostility towards Russia. What do you think about that?
You're right. No, you're right. Iran fits into that larger pattern of kind of geopolitical contestation. Iran's, whatever reasons we want to see for this, defiance of US imperial imperatives, kind of aligns Iran with China, to some extent with Russia. Iran, in fact, or the Islamic Republic it has a set of drones that are very nasty and effective and cheap to make. And they are causing a lot of damage in this ongoing war. And they've given them to Russia to use against Ukraine. And it's true, yeah, it's part of that larger kind of configuration and contestation, and to maybe even be a little bit more kind of hazard guessing is, I think, if the Islamic Republic can come out of this confrontation standing, badly bruised, badly hurt, his leadership is wiped out, but still seems to be able to resist and stand. I think it's going to be a huge setback for what I've called Trump's imperial binge. I mean, um, he could not really accomplish anything during his first year domestically, and pushback was growing, an economic front. mad immigration policies on killing U.S. citizens in the streets of this country. So he seemed to have gone on a binge in foreign relations, neo-imperialism, kidnapping Maduro in Venezuela, and then picking on Iran. But I think there he made a big mistake because despite his expectation, I don't think the Israelis had any illusions because their game plan is go out there and do damage. It doesn't matter what happens. If the regime falls, it falls. If it doesn't fall, we just bomb them to rubble and we don't care if Iran disintegrates, if the whole region goes out in flames or chaos, all the better. They don't care. But all of Iran's neighbors, and I think at least some kind of more sober factions in the American establishment, think that that's crazy. If you want to bring down this regime, it won't happen this easily. And if you just destabilize it, what's the consequences? And so, yeah, without prolonging this too, I see what you're asking, and yeah, it's absolutely part of this equation. At this moment, I'm not supporting this war. I want it to end immediately. Um, but I think, and the burden of the war is an ordinary Iranian, so it's not a good thing. War is never a good thing. I mean, this is what all of you are about, and I'm with you. But so far, politically, it seems that the Islamic Republic is winning this war. The back is to the wall. The US and Israel want to, they say, we want to bring you down. And so for them, it's do or die. And they can't militarily defeat the US and or Israel, one of them alone. But what they can do, and they're cleverly doing this, they're raising the cost of the war to their enemy. They're trying to, and effectively have closed the Strait of Hormuz. They're disrupting the flow of oil. We have like an energy crisis in this country. And I think that at some point, and maybe not too far away, Trump is going to throw in the towel, declare a magnificent victory, and want out. Um, that would be a huge setback for Trump's new imperialist agenda. He wants to invade Cuba. He has said that he has his sights on Cuba, and that's an easier target. I would say he would want to invade Cuba, occupy it, and do the regime change that way. And he could have done it. But I think this war with Iran may have thrown a wrench into that.
Yeah, that's
Thank you.
that's very true. So we have three hands up and just a couple minutes. So if we can, Aida and then Michael and Dick Bunce, if you can ask a very short question, we'll take each of you. And then Afshin, if you can maybe tie those in, it's kind of like a gymnastics thing, and you'll be doing the dismount. So Aida, if you can go first.
I'll try to make it as short as possible. I just feel like I haven't really found any actual deep analysis about this government, hearing it continuously, the word regime being used for sovereign government is concerning, as well as the fact that lack of analysis on the class issue and how the current republic came to be in terms of the dispossession of um, the peasant class, the rural class, and how many of the people who are from the diaspora currently in Iran came from the rich upper class and actually, took a lot of money from Iran. And the Shah itself was a symbol of decadence and dispossession of the peasant class. And there was, incredible censorship and superficiality in its cinema and its behavior, and that obviously marked this extreme revolution that was in contrast to that, and the fact that there was like religious activity completely suppressed as well. And I think there's a real lack of analysis in the United States of leadership in that regard. And my concern is
Aida, I'm sorry,
I'm
but
sorry.
we've got only a couple minutes.
Yeah, I guess I'm saying is that I'd like to see more analysis on how Iran has been able to protect its sovereignty and how other forms of governance might not have been able to, and how this form of government is forced to be more tight controlled because of the fact that its sovereignty has been continuously attacked, and how the
Okay,
only way to create a
I'm
free
sorry.
Iran is to release it from this imperialism and attacks from this country.
Thank you. Michael, your question.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things to talk about, but to me, the fundamental question facing us is what can we do to stop the war? That's what I said at the beginning. I
Yeah.
feel like, this is actually the least popular war in U.S. history, and that even the MAGA base of Trump is questioning it, and that how can we play a much more active role in galvanizing that sort of distaste for the war and the discrediting of Zionism into a much more active peace movement. The response to, Trump's war in the streets here with ICE, I think, was very, very powerful. And I don't think the response to this war, there's the slogan about politics stops the water edge. The Democrats haven't done squat to really stop it, and I don't think the movement has done enough to stop it. So, if people have any insight into that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
And Dick Bunce.
I'll make a statement and I'd like to ask your response to it. I'll try to be brief as best I can. I was part of a Presbyterian mission to Iran back in the mid 60s. And I had just graduated from a theological seminary, and the program I went into was much like the Peace Corps. We were there to learn and to help as best we could. And my job was to teach English as a second language to students at the University of Tehran. I was besieged by the students with their upset about Mossadegh and about the support of installation of Savak and the support of the Shah. We had to talk outside the buildings because of Savak's ears listening everywhere, etc. Then I went over, I always had lunch at the embassy. And at the embassy, it was all, the Shah, he's solid, no problem. We've surrounded him with all the military and material imaginable, et cetera, et cetera. Two different worlds. And the embassy world could not hear the university world. They could not hear it. So I've begun to wonder whether we have a cultural narcissism that makes a Trump inevitable. Uh, so this gets in the psychological realm, and I'd really appreciate if you have any insight here. Do we have such a culture? In talking with my colleagues who had been in various countries with this whole Peace Corps approach, same thing. Latin America, all over, uh, the American attachés, etc., could not hear. Okay, so do you think we have a kind of cultural narcissism at work in all of this?
Afshin, I hate to put you in that position, but if you can tie all that together for a quick analysis, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll try. I start with Dick's question, uh, which is maybe it's not the easiest, but I get into what you mentioned in the book. I talk about the Peace Corps. I had a Peace Corps teacher myself in 1968, 69, and he made such a good impression. Like people like people were going not to just Tehran, they were going, you were in Tehran, but people were going around the country, and they were the counter to the ugly American. And I do get into that, and I do get into the other thing you mentioned, this dichotomy between people like you who were in Iran and they interacted with ordinary people, and the embassy who just was cooking up this deliberate image of everything is hunky-dory, the Shah is popular. And I'm not the only one. If you go back to the records of that time, all the studies that came, especially after the revolution, noticed that. And I spent some considerable time with that. So, yeah, I'm there with you. I went and found my Peace Corps teacher after 50 years, and I'm in touch with him now. The personal touch there. The question before that, was about the peace movement, what we can do. I would say I'm very optimistic. This is not just 2 weeks, but in these 2 weeks, there's been tremendous pushback against it. I think the Democrats made a big mistake forcing that vote right away. They should have waited a little bit. If they have the vote now, they may get it for whatever it's worth. The old peace movement took years and years to build up. This one has come this far, and I'm personally very optimistic about the possibility of being able to stop Donald, um, which has great consequences. I mean, his agenda would be defeated. It has consequences for midterm elections, for checking his binge around the world. So I'm optimistic about the peace movement. It takes me back to Aida's question, which Aida, I know where you are coming from, and I have at least partly sympathy for uh, seeing the Islamic Republic as an anti-imperialist actor. But the difficulty is, I think you could have anti-imperialist actors that are reactionary when it comes to their domestic policies. To to say that you defend, uh, we don't, and question of sovereignty is there. I don't agree with you. Iran, if you mean the people of Iran, they're not sovereign. They're not self-ruling. They don't control the government. So this question of sovereignty, I know some analysts have put that forward. I would say no, the people of Iran are not sovereign, just like the people of this country are not really sovereign. But do we call for an end to this war? Do we condemn imperialist aggression? Yes, we should and we do. Do we have to support the Islamic Republic? No. I mean, this is a vicious dictatorship that is mowing down its population in the streets. There's no need to support the Islamic Republic to be uh, anti-imperialist from a progressive stand that acknowledges that this government is not popular, it's a dictatorship, and yet at the same time calling for an end to the imperialist war on Iran.
Well, Rick has given me permission to thank you, Afshin. We're going to have you back. It's just clear that your incisive analysis is extraordinary for us, and I'm so grateful you're with us today. I'm grateful your presentation has been recorded. I know I and others have questions, and that's why we need to build a relationship with you. To that end, most people on this screen know it's my moment to grant you card-carrying membership in ICUJP. Your lifetime membership is fully paid. We would invite you back to join us in future programs, either that you present or simply to be a member of us. Your heart and your mind seems consistent with our motto that religious communities and civil communities should stop blessing war and violence. So we wish you, family and friends in Iran, safety. I do agree with you. I think there's a tipping point with the Imperial Trump administration. There will be a No King's Day march on March 28. The organizers have included Stop the War in Iran as a theme of that march. In Los Angeles and across the country, over 2,500 events have been planned. If people will act, it will be the largest protest in American history, and it comes at a perfect time to impose Trump's imperialistic wars. So thank you, sir, very much.
Thank you all very much. I have to leave, but I'm glad I was here, and I will be back. Thank you for taking me as a member, and I look forward to seeing at least some of you in the Los Angeles protests.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
We'll
Thank
find
you
each
very
other.
much.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Rick has also asked me to move seamlessly to my reflection. I see some comments in the chat, and I appreciate people who have joined us, and I hope you'll continue to join us, although that individual may have just dropped off. It's a tremendous challenge to include everyone's questions, everyone's comments in these programs. I regret if your question was not fully answered or you didn't get an opportunity to ask a question. I think we had a tremendous resource with us today, and it was so important to get his information, to have him share his information with us. And so that's always a challenge. And I hope in some sense you got a full picture as much as you could of what our guest had to say. My reflection was also to comment on the Trump administration and what I'm calling the judicial empire strikes back. There have been over 600 lawsuits filed against the Trump administration in the last 15 months. It is unprecedented in terms of how civic society, the legal community, and the courts are fighting back in the midst of the most overwhelming exercise of executive power in certainly recent presidential history, if not in the entire history of the United States. Lawsuits and legal judgments are necessary, but are not sufficient as a part of the resistance against this fascist government. So my few minutes today focusing on the lawsuits and what lawyers and judges are doing is certainly not meant to suggest that that is the full answer to stopping this American regime. And that's literally why I mentioned No King's Day on March 28 and all the other forms of resistance that we must participate in. But I do want to mark this period. When lawsuits are filed, there are two sides to a lawsuit, and judges are meant to hear those sides and to consider the legal arguments. But once a court makes an order, until and unless reversed by higher courts, those judgments, injunctions, and lawful orders must be complied with by all parties, and especially the Department of Justice, which today is the Department of Injustice. So last week, a federal judge vacated an immigration court ruling that had given Trump broader powers to detain immigrants, forcing now, because of the court's intervention, to have bond hearings and then possibly release thousands that are in custody. U.S. District Judge Sunshine Sykes excoriated the Trump administration's claim that it was targeting the worst of the worst in these deportations. The judge said it is not the worst of the worst that are swept into the worldwide and reckless violations of the law by the executive branch. She pointed to the case of Liam Canyona Ramos, who was detained without a lawful warrant with his father. She said that despite her earlier ruling, migrants were continually being denied bond hearings and instead are forced to file habeas corpus petitions to seek their relief. Another judge only a few days ago found that in 4,400 times since October, Donald Trump's administration has detained immigrants illegally. I'm repeating what the court found. In 4,400 cases, the Trump administration has detained immigrants unlawfully. The district judge, Thomas Johnson in West Virginia, an appointee of George W. Bush, found it is appalling that the government insists that this court should redefine or completely disregard the current law as it is clearly written. Under Trump, the number of people in ICE detention reached about 68,000 this month, up about 75% from when Trump took office. And what's happening is those are reckless detentions, not being held in accordance with lawful procedure. In at least 4,421 cases, more than 400 federal judges have ruled since October that those immigration enforcement proceedings were illegal. In the span of a few days in January, lawyers filed habeas corpus petitions for the 5-year-old Ecuadorian boy detained in the driveway of his Minnesota home. A Ukrainian man with a valid temporary humanitarian status was detained on his way to work as a cable technician. A Salvadoran man married to a U.S. citizen and father of a 3-year-old autistic child who is also a U.S. citizen was detained. And an Eritrean hospital worker with refugee status was arrested after letting agents into his apartment complex, and a Venezuelan man was arrested after dropping off his daughter at school. Judges have excoriated the Trump administration, and in Minnesota, the chief judge of the Minnesota Federal Court, Patrick Schultz, a George W. Bush appointee, threatened to hold U.S. government lawyers in criminal contempt because one way or another, ICE will comply with this court's order. He identified 210 orders issued in 143 cases in Minnesota in which ICE officials did not comply with court orders. So this movement has moved into a new phase in which our legal system is doing its job. We don't know how the U.S. Supreme Court will react to these cases as they move up through the system. I am deeply concerned that the 6-member majority may not hold true, but I'm hopeful they will see the record of what even Republican-appointed judges have done in upholding the rule of law. Those lawyers and judges are doing their part. We need to do our part in this resistance by turning out on March 28. And here at ICUJP, we promise to continue to present provocative, informative programs just like the one you saw today. Thank you so much, and I turn it back to Rick.
I do want to center us and get us in the right frame to go out into the world, right? Because there is so much being thrown at everybody right now. And I think the presenter we had today just kind of made clear that we have been through this before. Not only ourselves, but our ancestors have been through this before in various ways. And as long as you keep going, you'll have a better chance of making it through. So if anybody would like to lift up anybody or anyone and Dick, if you don't mind sending us off into the real world, that would be great.
Okay. Yeah, I think I may be typical of so many on this screen. My mind is just swirling, and that's a good thing. We need to be shaken and pushed, and here we are in the midst of questions about whether democracy is under attack. I think that the context for our gathering right now is that the attackers are winning. The democracy is suffering terribly, more than usual, far more than usual. So, with that in mind, as an interfaith organization, as we come humbly before God, may we ask for that extra measure of commitment, and in the midst of the commitment of love for one another and even for our enemies. And realizing that what's before us seems impossible, but the God of many names is used to dealing with the impossible. So, with a sense of joined hands, let's move forward, hopefully seeing one another on March 28th. And if not, it's specifically each other, people of like mind and heart. So we have much to work for and much to hope for. Amen.
Thank you, Dick. Thank you, Rick, for corralling the cats and keeping us moving and packing in so much information today. Thank you to every one of you for joining us. Thank you for our speaker. Please join us next week. You can see the kind of work that ICUJP is committed to. And we welcome you back each Friday and in the events that we plan in between. Thank you. Do something for justice and kindness this week. Thank you very much.